If you grew up in the 80s, you remember the hundreds of rock bands that came on the scene in those years. Some of them shone with a single album. Some of them lagged behind the times. In this video, I share with you 10 rock bands from the 80s that deserve so much more. Let's get started. I'm starting the list with Tyketto. I think Tyketto is one of the most solid bands that came out in the late 80s but had bad luck in the 90s. At that time, everyone thought that glam metal had come to an end, and then Tyketto came on the scene and released Don't Come Easy. Forever Young wasn't just a song, it was a song that made everyone who was young at the time shiver inside. It was completely simple, full of cliches, and it perfectly combined depression and struggles. But the band didn't stop at just one hit. With songs like When You Walk Away and Wings, they showed how melodic and refined it could be. Danny Vaughan's vocals were more soulful than the classic 80s vocals. It was not a screaming vocal, but a narrating one. Brooke St. James's guitar tones were neither too hard nor too soft. It had just the right amount of power, and he was able to adjust it very well. But you know what the real problem was? In 1991, Don't Come Easy was released. The same year, Nirvana released Smells Like Teen Spirit. From that moment on, the label support for such bands was suddenly cut off. Tyketto's second album, Strength in Numbers, was only released in 1994 because the label delayed it. And at that point, things had already changed. I continue my list with Babylon A.D. Babylon A.D. They were one of the bands that recorded the last breath of the 80s cleanly. Their appearance was a glam rock classic, but there was a hidden harshness and depth to their sound. Their self-titled debut album, released in 1989, was extremely powerful for its time. Tracks like Bang Go the Bells, Hammer Swings Down, or The Kid Goes Wild were not only performed on stage, but also in movies. Vocalist Derek Davis's voice was, in my opinion, one of the least talked about, but one of the most grounded vocals of the era. There was neither too much treble strain nor a cartoon vocal character, it was just natural and clear. The guitars were in the same line, clear, riff-oriented, but melodic. Desperate was the most forgotten, but perhaps the most felt song of the band. As the grunge wind blew them all away, Babylon A.D. also disintegrated in that wind, yet it always kept its audience. Today, they are still a band you can still see at some festivals. I'm continuing my list with Dangerous Toys. When I heard their name for the first time, I honestly thought just a classic fun glam band. But then I listened to Tesin Plesin and realized that this band was something more. Their first album, released in 1989, seemed to gather all the energy of the era on one record. It was loud, rebellious, but melodic and catchy at the same time. There are few bands from Texas that could come out of Hollywood and actually sound like Hollywood but Dangerous Toys did it. If songs like Teasin' Pleasin' are still played in rock bars, there's a reason for that sincerity. Vocalist Jason McMaster's voice was not your typical glam vocal for me. There was neither excessive treble strain nor a cartoonish vocal character, it was just raw and real. Scared was completely different. That melodic structure, that sincerity, it was a masterpiece. Dangerous Toys showed that they could be not only fun, but also deep. But unfortunately, the period that came after the album was when grunge was on the rise, and record labels turned their backs on bands like them. Now, if you want to say, don't blame grunge all the time, I get it, but unfortunately, this is the truth. After that, the band started to fall out of favor and lost momentum over time. I continue my list with Ezo. They came out of Japan and entered the American hard rock scene in the late 80s in such a way that the scene was shaken not only by their sound, but also by their attitude. 1980, Seven's self-titled EZO album immediately stood out with the quality of its production and the freshness of its sound. House of 1000 Pleasures and Flashback Heart Attack brought a completely different atmosphere from the East into the familiar world of classic glam metal. Vocalist Masaki Yamada's voice, in my opinion, was much more dynamic than most American vocalists of the time. He had both a theatrical and sincere expression. The guitar tones throughout the album were also different from what we were used to, melodic, yet aggressive. Their second album, Fire 1989, was technically more solid, but it couldn't maintain the same striking impact as their debut. Nevertheless, EZO went down in history as one of the first major Japanese rock bands to break into the American scene in the late 80s. I continue my list with the House of Lords. When the band formed in 1987, their goal was simple: to add something to hard rock. House of Lords looked like one of the big stage bands of that era, but musically, they were much more sophisticated. Their self-titled debut album, released in 1988, was a rock giant with its powerful production, symphonic touches, and Baroque atmosphere. Greg Giuffria, one of the founding members, brought the keyboard sound to a level where it could actually compete with the guitar. James Christian, the vocalist, in my opinion, is one of the strongest but least talked about voices of that era. Tracks like I Wanna Be Loved and Love Don't Lie have that classic arena rock feel, but there's a surprising emotional depth to them too. Few bands were able to strike that balance. The band changed lineups a few times after that, but those first two albums from the late 80s are still unforgettable for a lot of people. I continue my list with Crywolf. Based in Los Angeles, Crywolf's sound had a much deeper European vibe than what you'd typically hear from the Hollywood scene, in my opinion. Released in 1990, Crunch had a tough, razor-sharp sound just like its name. Tracks like Pretender and Road to Ruin stood out as some of the most technically impressive and melodically rich songs of that era. But what truly made Crywolf special wasn't just the songwriting, it was vocalist Tim Hall's powerful and dramatic delivery. The guitars weren't strictly glam or heavy metal, they blended both styles and carved out a sound of their own. Unfortunately, Crywolf's name floated around among record labels, but they didn't receive the support they needed at the time. Maybe their timing was off, maybe their marketing fell short. But none of that diminished the quality of their music. I continue my list with War Babies. They were from Seattle, but they didn't fit the classic grunge narrative at all. To me, they represented the last major melodic hard rock push of the late 80s. The self-titled War Babies album, released in 1992, is a rock gem that literally dropped right as the grunge explosion hit. In other words, the timing was a disaster, but the content was perfect. Vocalist Brad Sinsel was already known for his work with Tyketto, but on War Babies, his voice sounded deeper and more mature. Songs like Cry Yourself to Sleep felt like a scream from the heart, not just vocally, but as a full band expression. The guitar tone flirted with glam, but also nodded to alternative rock. So War Babies wasn't tied to just one genre, maybe that's why I think it was too mixed for the market. I won't say it again, but the media's attention quickly shifted elsewhere after the album dropped. War Babies may not have made the impact it deserved, but for anyone who knows that record, it's still something special, still different. I continue my list with Electric Angels. Electric Angels formed in Los Angeles in 1989, but their true spirit came from the streets of New York. This band had a charisma of their own. The self-titled album they dropped that year is, in my opinion, one of the most underrated albums of that time. True Love and Other Fairy Tales, Rattlesnake Kisses, The Drinking Song, all of them were melodic and they hit you in the heart. Vocalist Shane and guitarist Ryan Roxie didn't fall into the usual cliches of that era. The lyrics felt like they were written from real experience. And that was the real value of Electric Angels. You didn't just hear them, you felt them. But yeah, record label drama meant their second album, New York Times, never got its proper release. So just imagine that. An album that was already recorded, just sitting there, unreleased. Years later, when it started going around as a bootleg, their what if only grew bigger. For me, Electric Angels will always be that band stuck somewhere between the end of the 80s and the start of the 90s, a story that never fully got told. I continue my list with Foghat. Formed in England in 1971, Foghat blended boogie rock, blues rock, and hard rock in such a way that it created a different feeling when they took the stage. They attracted attention with their first album, Foghat, 1972, but the real breakthrough came with 1975's Fool for the City, and of course, Slow Ride from that album. Songs like Drivin' Wheel and Stone Blue prove the quality and energy of the band. Rod Price, the master of slide guitar, was one of the most characteristic guitarists of his era. Over the years, the lineup changed, the music world changed, but Foghat kept going. They didn't follow the trends, they always went their own way. I continue my list with James Gang. James Gang formed in Ohio in the late 60s. Before Joe Walsh's guitar started shouting, we first heard it whisper in James Gang. The band hit the scene in the late 60s, but their true impact came in the 70s. When people hear Funk Number 49, most know the song, but not the band behind it. Joe Walsh's slide work and rhythm control were on a whole different level. The band shifted gears after Walsh left, but those early albums were ahead of their time. Walsh went on to become a global name with the Eagles. But this band deserves to be remembered for the rawness and honesty of those early years. That's it for today's video. Don't forget to subscribe and like the video if you want to support us. Check out our other rock videos. See you soon!